Everyone. Thank you all for joining us. This particular conversation is a part two in many regards of our previous conversation, which was titled Globalization Before Modernism. This conversation that we're having today, it's titled Love/Hate, Classification as a Mode of Production. We have with us Zigam Azizov, who is a British artist and a philosopher. He was born on the 13th of April, 1963, in the former USSR, Azerbaijan, SSR, and currently lives and works in London. His work addresses questions of time and image and the narrative procedures of globalization with the languages of migration, media, and the new mimesis. He uses material that resembles means of writing and media images and transforming them into the conceptual art to comment on the philosophical elaboration of the technologically constructed time. He was trained in art, philosophy, and cultural theory in the UK, France, and Austria. He completed his studies in philosophy in England in the early 1990s, what he couldn't receive in the former Soviet Union for ideological reasons, although initially planned to devote himself to philosophy completely. Later, he started his PhD in philosophy first at Goldsmiths University of London, UK, and completed at the Klagenfurt University, Austria, with a thesis on the French philosopher Bernard Stiegler's work and a philosophical exploration of images. Since the middle of the 1980s, actively involved in the art world, exhibiting and publishing his work, as well as developing the body of work which brings together his philosophical interests. Taking his artistic studies as a philosophical activity, art as philosophy, philosophy as art, he has exhibited and written texts about his projects extensively. He is one of the pioneering artists to study the migration paradigm as a novel understanding of the movement of globalization and space-time relationships, what he calls migrosophia, migration plus philosophy. Since 1993, this project was partly made in collaboration with the cultural theorist Stuart Hall, who became a close friend and collaborator. He exhibited his work worldwide, including most recently at the Venice Biennale in 2019, 2011, as well as in 2003 as part of Utopia Station. At the Tate Modern Gallery in London in 2006, Haus der Kunst Munich, Germany, 2004, Grazer Kunstwerngras, Austria, 2002, and TN Probe, Tokyo, Japan, 2001, among others. As a part of his practice, he has been lecturing and teaching in different universities, including the University of California, Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design, Goldsmiths University of London, Vienna Academy of Art, and the University of Aberdeen, University of Klagenfurt, Middlesex University. He's also lectured worldwide in galleries and museums. Zigam, over to you, and hope to have an exciting conversation as always.
Thank you very much, Satyajit. Great to see you again, and I'm very glad that we'll continue our conversation. Hopefully, it will continue what we have started already about, well, general title, Globalization Before Modernism. And last time, we talked about contingencies and consciousness, you know. Already there, I was thinking that contingencies, yes, I absolutely agree with Quentin Meillassoux. I became interested in his work also because myself, for many years, I've been thinking that everything we do, everything is happening in our culture, our world of art, science, everything. They're all conventions. I mean, we are really creating an agreement and, you know, following this agreement up to the point when something different happens. So this is really important part of understanding of contingency also. And when I read Quentin Meillassoux, who said that we need to recognize contingencies only, and full stop. I mean, that's a sort of very powerful statement. But on the other hand, I started to ask myself questions. But contingencies also create conditions. Yeah, so from here, my argument starts. I'll come back to talk about this again a little later when I go to talk about Kant. But basically, I want to give a little bit introduction to say what will be the structure of my little talk before we start discussing. I'm going to introduce this idea of the main problem of Western metaphysics, as I think, which is, I believe, this strict separation between intelligibility and sensibility in order to understand those contingencies that I talked about. Of course, not all philosophers talked about contingencies. Most of the philosophers, in fact, talk that that is the world is, you know, whereas one has, hypothetically, we could think of world being like this. But in any case, in that way or another, there was a strict separation between this is intelligent, this is sensual, this is accordingly, for some reason, this is, you know, science, rational, this is art because it's irrational, sensual. So this is, even in Plato, we come across, you know, he's talking about sensuality and you know, rational approach, because as we know, Plato had this understanding of a reality in two terms: reality visible, reality invisible. This visible reality is something which we can, you know, describe through mathematics, especially geometry. Geometry was his thing, of course. In fact, in Plato's Academia, when on the wall, the famous phrase was saying, anyone who doesn't know anything about geometry shall not enter here. So geometry was very important knowledge for them. But on the other hand, there was also art. If we think of music, we think of music today as art. Then they didn't think about it like art. They were thinking also about it as a sort of science, because music helped alongside with three other subjects: geometry, arithmetics, astronomy, music. Music was finally helping to describe the sort of harmony existing in the world, especially the structure of heavens above our heads, so to speak, universe, basically. So it was accepted as a scientific discipline rather than artistic discipline. But that is a very early form of classification. This sensibility and intelligibility division, in fact, created, this is what I want to talk in a much you know, depth classification. That is still here. We have still have this. That is why I call love-hate relationship. Because on the one hand, we need to classify things. We need to create a Mendeleev's periodic table, like plan all the time for us, but not in order just strictly to stick to it, as far as I understand. But to see what I am going to do, but things may change, drastically change. But it is a model in my head. My action may introduce some other contingent stuff, you know. But instead we have, unfortunately, sometimes we see that we have to follow strict plans, for example. It will come clear what I want to say by this, I hope, during the course of this conversation. But on the other hand, it has become, this thing itself became a huge discussion, huge debate for philosophically in general, at least in Western philosophy. As I already mentioned, Plato, but then Plato followed by his student, very important moment, Aristotle, who created, in fact, considers a founder of formal logic. He decided that everything has to be classified. We have to call physics, poetics, politics, you know, aesthetics, and well, everything else doesn't fit into all this called metaphysics. And it's in itself very contingent idea, because Aristotle himself used metaphysics as a phrase rather than as a discipline. Ta metaphysica, meaning with what is everything I can talk about physics because we know about physics. In fact, Greek philosophy started as a physics, actually. Earlier Greek philosophy, Thales, Anaximander, Anaxagoras, three very important founders of Greek philosophy. In fact, they were living Ionian philosophy. That's what we call. They called it physis. And then Pythagoras was mathematically numbers, explaining the world mathematically. So Aristotle also, in fact, as we say, Plato also was taking geometry as an important basic. I actually also agree with all this, of course. And Aristotle said, we know what is physics. And we know what poetics is because also, of course, Greeks were very well versed, so to speak. They were writing a lot from drama, tragedy, poetry, historical works were very much, very powerful, which we still study, of course. But what else stays, which we cannot perceive through our reason, knowledge, it called ta metaphysica. That is all beyond physics. And when his work has been later already for his Aristotle's school organized, his followers decided to publish manuals already. That was the first academic books by the published in order to teach students. So his students called, as we said, poetics, aesthetics, physics, and then everything else that didn't fit into it called metaphysics. So anyway, this kind of classification has been around for quite a long time. As we talked last time, Aristotle's very important, significant for the Western world, Andalusian philosophy, etc., etc. And it continues like this up to modernism. And I just wanted, I'm sorry being so brief because I just wanted to say that I wanted mostly to talk about today about this classification, and it is ups and downs for modernism and also specifically for the crisis that we're experiencing today. So then, of course, where the emergence of modern philosophy, modernism, through Descartes' work, Spinoza, Leibniz, British empiricism, we have a giant figure of Kant, ergo Kant, so to speak. I very much find Kant fascinating. And lots of people really criticize him, but for right reasons too. But Kant's significance for modernism, for understanding of everything that's happening today also, because he could, like Slavoj Žižek would say, over-identify through his own confusion problems of philosophy. One of these problems, of course, was question of intelligence, intelligibility, and sensibility. Accordingly, he went on to do his very famous three-volume, his three critics: critic of reason, critic of practical reason, critic of judgment. When in 1771, already when Kant wasn't known yet as a philosopher, he was teaching natural sciences at Königsberg University. And he had a very good friend, his former student, Marcus Hertz. It's very famous. In fact, they were in correspondence all the time. And Kant was writing to him about what he understood. They were very good friends. A very famous letter dated on 21st of February 1772, that will be 9 years before the publication of Critique of Pure Reason. He writes to Hertz to say, my friend, I am confused completely because I have defended my dissertation, which is called inaugural dissertation of Kant, about, which is called What is the World? And whereas where the world has its beginning in time and space, and time and space are consistently like physical, treated by physical, natural attitudes rather than anything else. Later will be called intuition by Kant, because his engagement that this world we are experiencing, inhabiting, does it have any beginning? You remember last time working about ends, here he was interested in beginnings. If it comes, emerges in time and space, but then he had even more confusing question, most interesting question, because I think it deserves to be investigated further, because he said, well, I want to see that there is an intelligible world, there is a sensible world, but I cannot answer to the question of how does intellect explain those objects of the world, whereas we can, and then let alone senses, which we don't understand at all. Therefore, he went on to investigate reason. That was because it was much more, much clearer. Let's note that the sense is much more complicated to understand than reason. I mean, that is a very important thing. So his question was vaguely, not exactly. He says, how can intellect explain the objects which intellect does not produce, as only God can produce objects? And then other way around also, objects also don't produce intellect, right? I mean, that was a question of in a way what we talk today, Miyasu talks contingency. But instead of accepting as simply as a contingency, he went on to rationalize, to say, but what can we understand? And he asked three questions, triple question, which he put, what can I know, what can I do, and what can I hope for? That is a Kantian, plan for his critical, pure reason, critical, practical reason, critical judgment further on. That is what happened. So this really became a biggest debate since Kant's first publication. He was criticized endlessly. Many people called him the person who has lost his mind. Later, Arthur Schopenhauer will call him completely lost his mind, although he was very interested in Kant's idea of critique altogether. The critique is very important. But, it also opened, interestingly enough, a new channel through misunderstanding, a new channel to some kind of new understanding of the world. One of the most immediate people I wanted to mention here specifically is not necessarily like following Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel only, but also the world of art, the world of poetry, the world of literature. For example, Heinrich von Kleist, whom I find extremely interesting personality, he was a poet, dramatist, but also he studied philosophy and mathematics. He himself wrote a couple of philosophical texts. One of them is called The Emergence of Thought Whilst Speaking. It's written about 1806, just the time when Hegel was publishing his philosophy of right. I'm saying that because you'll see there is very interesting parallels. Like Heinrich von Kleist, in this already as title says, it says, well, the thought emerges up when we start speaking. There is no thought before that. Ex de facto, what they called it. And then it gives a huge possibility for us to treat this thought, what is it? With a mixture of wisdom and passion. You see, wisdom and passion. The term wisdom is very specific here. People like Slavoj Žižek wouldn't like. He said, I don't like wisdom or something, but I will come back to it. It's very important use here. In fact, it's very true. Modernity has cut off wisdom. So the wisdom just doesn't let us. Actually, in a very racist manner, they were also calling non-Europeans wise people. Yeah, but actually, we can see now. I will come back to it specifically. Like to say, actually, the problem is it's not a question of how it is called, given that philosophy itself, the term philosophy, love for wisdom. That's what it means. In any case, this kind of division became part and parcel of modernism in general. What happens in the 19th century? The 19th century is a reclassification of new knowledge and new techniques that has emerged through industrialization. That is a very important part and parcel of modernism, but also politically through colonialism. emergence of anthropology, emergence of geography societies everywhere, in France, for all these imperial societies, very important. Emergence of all these subjects has to do classifying according to this principle of sensibility and intelligibility. But they were asking questions, but what to do with sensibility if we don't know about sensibility? Okay, let's call arts and literature sensibility. That's what happened. Humanities were organized based on, according to the principles of natural sciences. Yeah, for example, sociology was emerged like Auguste Comte, who was considered the founder of positivism. So this kind of 19th century is a battle of this kind of classification, actually, including, for the first time, as we know, talking about labor. This is marginal question because, of course, we're talking about Karl Marx. I believe Marx influenced by Kant as much as he was influenced by Hegel. He says something very important, very interesting here. Industry, yes. Industrialization is yes. New labor, everything. But what we see amidst all this emergence of new industrialization, machines, technique, the loss of knowledge. Proletariat, in fact, has been always treated in a very strange manner. And originally, proletariat means offspring. Yeah, that's people who carry on stuff. Partly also who is doing dirty work, basically. But my own interpretation, Marxist interpretation, is that it is also people who lost their knowledge of their work, their way of living, working, and thinking. Like Bernard Stiegler says, like this: living, working, and thinking, meaning that machines. With the coming of the machines, with the coming organization of the labor in factories, workers were only people who operating these machines, and they lost the skills that before that they were, like people were making shoes, for example. The person who was a master craftsman, knew how to do shoes, but now he doesn't know that the machine is doing shoes.
Yes.
There is very interesting a metaphor was told by Adam Smith already much before Marx, in fact, who was very influential for Marx in 1789 book, I think, published for the first time. The Wealth of Nations is one of very important books of Scottish Enlightenment, where he says he imagines very interesting factory, pin factory, in 19th century. He lives in 18th century. He says, in 19th century, there will be a factory, imagine pin factory, where 100 workers are working in this pin factory. Nobody knows how to make the whole pin. Most importantly, nobody knows where are they, what they're doing here. But all they know that we get a little bit of money out of it, a little bit of living. So it is Adam Smith imagining it in 18th century, 20th century, 19th century. But later I will talk about how it became reality of our times. This loss of knowledge with coming of machines dominating technologies, etc. I would reserve this to talk about it more in our third part of our conversation, which will talk about images and techniques.
Yes.
But for now, I just wanted to come a little bit to finalize to say that basically, with this classification, modernism takes really speeding up. Definitely true. So it has become a very powerful. For example, science has started to bring lots of results, but also partly because there was a necessity of this science. For example, chemistry, because oil, for the first time, the invention of oil digging, and America, Texas was Baku, Azerbaijan, where I come from, was one of the earliest places where oil was, people were getting out oil. But science is needed to understand what is it about, what this oil is, how we can use it. chemistry, because of this development of chemistry, and the pace was very important. Mathematics had to get rid of all the observational nature to become very pragmatic, just to say, we have to calculate everything to make sure that how much money it brings to Nobels, how much money it brings to Rothschilds, etc., etc. So this capitalism took over through the classification of sciences. That's very important to understand. That is why subjects like philosophy became really like for upper class entertainment. Literature became entertaining for people, for the subjects to listen, and entertaining stories during their leisure time, like a brainwashing, basically. Which doesn't mean that, of course, the high literature remained. We all talked about, for example, about Emile Zola last time. And all of this emergence of very powerful literature is taking place at the same time in 19th century. A very powerful art, painting, very important, modernism, impressionism, etc., etc. But they were all sort of resisting forces to this kind of, on the one hand, resisting to the ending of manual labor. On the other hand, Impressionism is actually getting rid of manual labor. We don't need to think about canonization in art anymore. We must be able to express our ideas as we know it. So that is why the use of this kind of broken lines, etc., etc., empty pages, like in case of Mallarmé, for example. So it is very important. One more example I want to bring, and to show how much this kind of demand of capitalism brought demand from mathematics. For example, you have to be exact, precise. Although up to this point, most of the mathematicians were philosophers, in fact, like Descartes, Leibniz, Kant himself, he was no mathematician, he was scientist. They knew that there is not such a thing like precise calculation. In year 1900, David Hilbert, a German mathematician and philosopher, a very important philosopher, giving a speech at the Parisian Congress, International Congress of Mathematics in Paris, put 100 questions in front of mathematics to say that these are questions which has to be solved in order to make sure that mathematics from now on doesn't take into account anything that is unsolvable. We have to know beforehand if it's possible to decide the problem, then we take it on. It is very famous, like Schaltung problem, the solution problem. We are solving questions at the moment, and what is not solvable, we just cannot be solved. We leave aside. If you remember yesterday, I talked about contingencies, or the other time, that getting rid of contingencies as imperfection. That is how it happened. I'm not blaming David Hilbert. This is genius. This is demand of this time. In fact, previously, having go back to Kant himself understood very interesting thing about modernism. He said, look, if we look at Greeks are very up to Descartes through the Greek influence of Greek philosophy. Most of the philosophy is interested in eudaimonia, so it's called eudaimonia, happiness. Question: what is my destiny in the world? To be happy, basically. And the Greeks were identifying virtue with the happiness, and Kant said, well, we cannot afford to be like this. We have to think of salvation. And happiness is in salvation. Whereas Greeks were, for example, identifying virtue with happiness, we have to see if this virtue brings any happiness for us. In other words, it's pragmatic approach, yes? So Hilbert's idea was this. But the most interesting thing for me is that his call for precision itself ended up proving that mathematics, there is no such thing as precision. There is only indeterminacy. The world itself indeterminate. It is not. We talk about uncertainty, when we don't know something, but indeterminate means it's precisely, we know physically, it proves that the world is indeterminate. Things, events are not determinate in the world. One of the early examples, for example, 1920s, Gödel's theorem, yes, so like, he said, well, mathematics still will be, there will be a solution of problems still will be during the process that we talked about before. However, this kind of understanding of indeterminacy, this kind of understanding of imprecision opened up a way to what we are today, computerization. Turing machine, which invented Alan Turing, who invented them. He improved the computers. He invented keyboards. He started to see that we can use actually all the information can be in front of us. We don't really. That's all brought us here. Cybernetics in 1950s. You know, a very interesting thing speaking about 1950s, and they also understood very well that danger is we have to know. Greeks knew about it, and people before modernism knew that it is not pure solution. We have to understand that it is still indeterminate. So perfection is impossible in that way or another. That is what a famous book by Norbert Wiener is called, The Human Used by Humans, which is very dangerous. The humans will dominate humans again, which we see today in Elon Musk's call for perfection. That is what, just to give one example. But also, as I promised, I wanted to say about wisdom something. Alfred Lotka, when also very important, you know, it's a similar group of people like Wiener. Lotka understood the danger of a use of technologies without just, you know, inhumanly, so to speak. Technology is inhuman that becomes assisting the human, basically. He said, he's using very interesting quote. It comes from Emily Dickinson, British poet. He says, knowledge comes, wisdom lingers. So we have to make sure that we have this wisdom part, this understanding. And as a little bit of way of, not by way of conclusion, but coming to the end to say what my own understanding would be from here, maybe for the discussion also.
Yeah.
That Lotka was one of the important people to understand this love-hate relationship, that we can really try to be as efficient as possible, but actually it's going to be dangerous. It's going to be working against us, like a sword, two-sided sword, basically. So, and at this time, one of the very important for my own research at the moment, also another very important scientist, Russian scientist, Ukrainian actually scientist, of Soviet, when it was Vladimir Vernadsky. He invented very interesting term called new sphere. New from new is intellect, sphere is a sphere. He was saying that a natural history went through three stages. First was geosphere, the sphere where no people, no human, no life existed, more precisely. Then biosphere, in his opinion, the emergence of life in Earth. That's when we created the whole thing which we know. But by development, gathering of the whole knowledge, we entered into the new stage of development. The Earth entered into a new stage. It's called new sphere, the sphere of intellect, where human becomes aware of his or her own surroundings. This is called new sphere. In this case, the role of thought, that is something excluded from the technocratic world, becomes hugely important. Why? Because thought, what is thought? He asked the question. Actually, Alfred Lotka was the first to ask this question, 1920s. He was saying, so how for me to understand the thought as a mathematician, if thought is not physical process? And he didn't answer to this question. That was not answer. Vernadsky's answer is very interesting, which I'm trying to develop myself now. Vernadsky said, but thought might be a response to these physical processes. So as a response, thought as a response also, of course, the word responsibility comes from here. Now, I don't want to sound moralistic, but I think human responsibility, we have to think of this idea still very important. I myself very much attracted to anarchistic views, etc., etc. But I think human response, understood in a very correct way, is something that we need today, basically. And as I last time from here, also, of course, my interest in Bakhtin, responsibility that also creates the dialogical nature, connectivity. Opening up this connectivity, and the most importantly, which is the heart of our conversation, is trying to live in the manner of non-essentialism. That is what I think is very important. I will stop here.
So, I'm just simultaneously, I'm on like 3 devices, just getting my notes in, notes and ideas in place. Just allow me a moment. So, if you remember, I'd mentioned that, I'd done a lecture on art and neuroscience as a part of this exhibition that I'd done on art and neuroscience. So, one of the things that, came out of that kind of a jostling, and I'm so sorry, I've not been able to send you the lecture. But one of the things that became a fundamental base and premise for the session was understanding the idea of understanding the idea of art, understanding the idea of cognition, of course, from a very scientific perspective, through the lens of mimesis. Because mimesis itself, of course, it's itself a fundamentally cognitive act, where especially when it comes to the larger group, because at a group level, when one looks at the conversation of mimesis, there's a lot of like genetic, there's a lot of kind of neurogenetic response that is also becoming a part of the larger ways of learning, so to say. And of course, within this larger conversation, this is where a lot of discussions and debates with Asit Asit Bhatt kind of come into picture.
Because he's a great artist. Yes,
great artist, and
was my student at some point.
Yes, and because why? Because we were colleagues, so we used to kind of discuss, debate, and kind of get into sometimes physical fights as well.
Yes.
So, but the fundamental factor of, and this is where kind of Asit's research of what he's kind of doing at this particular point of time of looking at larger ideas of drawing and like artisanal practice and so on and so forth. But fundamentally, and because we are kind of also next session is going to be on images. I think bringing an artistic perspective, or bringing the role of an artist or an artisan could kind of shed a slightly different light over here, because while we of course always consider that the machine in many ways is responsible, or has kind of led to, maybe not if responsible, but has kind of led to moving away from a lot of erosion of a lot of these mimetic kind of gestures or mimetic skills too. But at the same time, can an argument not be made, which is in fact made by Frank Lloyd Wright in his essay, The Art and Craft of the Machine, where the machine fundamentally kind of, and which is where I think wisdom also comes in, where if that kind of wisdom persists, if that kind of wisdom is, really understood well, which modernism in many regards kind of wanted to, chuck away.
An avant-garde artist also.
Avant-garde artist also gets chucked away.
My friends.
Yeah, but if that combination of that wisdom and that let's say that machine kind of come together, isn't that exactly what in many ways when you cross AI with, let's say, Industry 5.0, isn't that exactly what kind of, the future it leads to? Because interestingly, and we had actually made this diagram, Asit and I, we had sat and made this diagram. So I'm just sitting and like having that also in front of me, where an artisan and an artist effectively brings in a certain intuitive, vulnerable approach towards, handling skill, an intuitive, vulnerable approach towards, handling their position in the world that they occupy in. And the machine kind of brings in that methodical, empirical, clinical approach towards, doing things.
Yes.
But isn't that exactly, and of course, ironically, what images we kind of get from AI today? They're quite,
Exactly. Exactly.
in some manners also soulless, because I think that idea of intuition and vulnerability is still something that we haven't been able to translate. But
Yes.
when we kind of talk about all of these things, again, coming back, if I've made sense up until this point, but coming back, don't these kind of, fundamentally, while they're exactly in alignment with this idea of, rejecting the binaries, rejecting this particular, let me bring up your note also, but rejecting these classifications in a more traditional sense, but don't they also kind of, allow for
Yes.
a merging of these two?
Absolutely.
And which is where my argument kind of comes in. Aren't we living in a time when technology and human thought seem to be at a place and point where, they can, they're almost simultaneously kind of functioning together? Because for
Yes.
a large part of human history, human civilization, our thoughts were kind of running at, let's say, 1,000 miles an hour, but the technology kind of took way too long to catch up with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree with you. In fact, that is why love hate, basically. So
Yeah,
it is,
yeah,
but first of all, I must tell you that I am not against machines or technology. Quite on the
yeah.
contrary, I think
Yes,
human is a nihil. We have a no, I told before, zero, empty.
yes,
We become human thanks to machines. But
yes,
first of all, to go back, maybe, first of all, to take very important source, which was for me very important source, like Bernard Stiegler's work,
yes, yes,
when he's relying on the work of André Leroy-Gourhan, who has shown that human, by bipedalism becoming a very important beginning of the cultivation of human culture, basically, because turning from quadrupedalism, walking on fours, into to standing on 2 feet, opened up the face and freed hands. Face was open with the contact with the world. Hands were freed for gestures. Machine, basically. This is machine within the human. But
yes,
soon after, very important thing has appeared, which has nothing to do with physics or biology, memory. You had to remember this gesture in order to survive. This has already starts every social thing coming in.
yes,
And the
yes,
idea was mnemonic techniques were invented with the invention of images. First
yes,
cave paintings were, of course, remembering what is what kind of animal to hunt, how to do it, etc. And we had to fix it. But the first, famously, Derrida called images and everything else is depicted writing technology. So we had to create certain technology which will remember for us, basically. This is very important. In French structuralism, when they started, they took this idea from another very interesting anthropological research by Claude Levi-Strauss, who says in Amazon tribes, when a certain tribe, non-Miwakbara tribe, wearing the face of the bird in their head, a lot of anthropologists are it's because they want to eat all the time. So Claude Levi says, no, it has nothing to do with that. It is to remember about hunting a certain bird. So it's about memory. It's about exteriorized form of my, this organic attitude. Where
Hmm.
organicity is completely gone, finished.
Hmm. Hmm.
So
Hmm. Hmm.
In this sense, I absolutely much, not that I like or not like, that is a way of being. We
Of
are
course.
only becoming something through writing, through reading, through speaking, through exteriorization. That's also at the beginning, I said language, which is very important, not only like in terms of communication, also creating conditions for contingent things to become non-contingent. We write down something, it becomes memorized, basically. Another person who I would also now, while we're speaking with you, especially in terms of neuroscience, Catherine Malabou, who important research on plasticity, human neuro structures being plastic.
Yes.
Plastic.
Yes.
This is Hegel and plasticity called that, saying that there is nothing is fixed, but this in non-fixity, this importance of understanding of indeterminacy too came to our understanding through the emergence of machines. This is
Yes.
a role of machines. Machines show to us actually we are incapable without me. We machines are standing against. Now you have to learn what to do with me. How which how to press on and off. Otherwise, you are lost completely. So I absolutely agree with you. It's a very important condition and very important to understand this technologized world, not as purely end of the world. I think that evangelic people talking about, oh, it's finished. No, it is not. Quite on the contrary. I think our
Exactly.
machines are fantastic. And what is my problem? I will tell you now here. My question is that um, thanks to machines, we can start to think more. But unfortunately, thought is deprivation of thought is going on. Either out of human laziness, I would like to allow myself to hear, or I don't know what's the reason, prejudice against thought. My problem is thought, therefore. And that is why the text which I've written, the project I was working on with Nidesh Loto, by the way, extremely important scholar of mimesis, but maybe the most leading post-human mimesis. I am very proud to contribute to his book, a recent book. My text is called New Mimesis. That is taken from Vernadsky's New Sphere. My message, of course, that we have to constantly learn skills of thinking, because thinking, that's what I mentioned it last time also. So it would be a fantastic world if machines will help us to improve, to make
Yes.
even better art, rather than just force us to do, what has to be reduced to technological determinism. Well, that's what
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that's I think that's that completely kind of, articulates this whole kind of gray area, so to say, because especially when we're kind of, discussing these things in a classroom environment, in a situation, especially when one talks to, let's say, design students or architecture students, or in certain degrees also our fine arts students working with these newer medias, or
Yes,
even like post new media, so to say. These are some of the most, I mean, unfortunately, this idea of machine is always looked at, of course, courtesy a lot of these Marxist ideas in a negative sensibility.
yes,
But
I
the
know what
fact
you
of the
mean.
yeah, 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 yeah. But the
Yes,
fact of the matter is that, when one kind of articulates the fact that fundamentally that machine is it's fundamentally an extension, as you mentioned, where the hands
yes,
themselves become the machine. Uh,
absolutely,
it
absolutely.
completely kind of allows for a newer method of kind of approaching this. On similar lines, I have one more kind of, let's say, doubt, or one more kind of prodding to do with you. um, how do you kind of course, like, even things like the keyboard, you brought in the Turing machine. You brought in the keyboard, you brought in the conversation of, you brought in the conversation of the keyboard. And of course, it's also in many ways extension of the human body.
Sure.
Um, it's an extension of the human body. Most of the devices, most of the technologies of the 21st century that we use, they're all effectively not just extensions, but they've become part of the body in many regard. Within this frame, how would you kind of position the thought that uh, machines themselves are the next natural evolution of the human body, because that's in many, very many discussions and debates and circles, especially under post-human philosophy,
Yeah.
that is the natural way forward. And at some point of time, we would kind of cease to exist.
Yes, I know what you mean. It is very interesting debate, but actually I would say it's not quite new because it is since Descartes, because Descartes
Yeah.
was a person, res cogitans,
Yes.
extension. Uh, as- but first of all, I want to make a reply on the extension bit a little more, and then come back to this
Yes,
question.
please.
It is very important. The whole new branch of philosophy of technology, is initiated by Franz Karp, who was very important, Ernst Karp, who lived in Texas, was a geographer and a philosopher, and he was influenced by Marx. Marx saying that what is technology? Technology is machines, and for example, what is it? Trains or railways. It's an extension of human senses, five senses. Like even, for example, if you take a car, the petrol is a blood, yeah, motor is a heart. So that is what Marx was talking about. It's very important. And Ernst Kapp also took this idea of extension. But there is also a very important secretive moment, because when Marx wrote about it, it was very interesting in Ludwig Feuerbach. That is why religions, the last time also I talked, I became interested to see this religion, role of religion. Feuerbach's work called Essence of Christianity, where he's talking about means to ends. He says why Protestant religion, for example, got rid of most of the sort of posh rituals of that is still continues with Catholicism or Protestant religion, Orthodox Russian churches. I said because in order they understood that, well, it's enough to come to pray. It's enough to come to the church to say, save me, God, and go. So that means this is something which maybe not even working, but it's just what I have to do in order to be able to survive within the society. This is
Yes.
and then Marx said that the extension of our bodies in technologies really become the way of living. We cannot survive without them. That is why it was politically is very, very important,
Yes.
important question. So now, and McLuhan talks about, of course, but I have one question now I'm writing something about against Mahlukan and even Marx. Well, not against. That's fantastic that he said about extension. But McLuhan saying like medium is message. Like he says, already technology has told this message. But what message? This is a question. This is where this love-hate relationship comes. But of course, we're liberal democratic people, we cannot give a recipe what it should be. So this brings back this idea that has been so much criticized by Marx itself, individual approach to machines. And this individual approach is impossible without thought, yeah, without thinking, without art, without aesthetics. That is why I always said it is very important to think why I am a little bit critical of this strict classification came along now. Universities are really dominated by, we have to study history, for example, history of Russia, forget about Germany, Austria, everything. But history should, I'm against, I think historians should have a full idea and then particularly specialized, because you cannot be so ignorant, there was a great British philosopher, Bertrand Russell, himself very highly positioned Cambridge University professor. He said something very interesting. He said, people are born ignorant, but they become stupid by education system. Sometimes it's true. It's true, because this is very important question, of course, where today machines. Well, yes, I love them, I repeat, but machines become, that is why I like Donna Haraway's notion of cyborg.
Yeah.
Because this is human machine extension. This is, you mentioned post-human theories, for example, there is also new materialism, yeah, like which combines feministic ideas, etc., which brings very interesting idea that we cannot get rid of subject completely. Human is still very important. So, but we have to think of that combination. Yeah, and that is much more. I don't know. I'm hoping that I'm answering to your question in the sense that the role of thought is very important here. The role of attitude, the role of attention, the role of dialogue, the role of language, and our being down to earth rather than being, extremely excited by machines is very important to understand. Otherwise, very true that machines can definitely, they dominate quite a lot of people already. We also have an experience. And that's why what Norbert Wiener's warning was about, human use by human beings. If we don't know machines very well, we don't find our own, I call it personal repertoire of understanding machines, then we are lost. Even though these websites, like people use a lot of Instagram now today, all sorts of social media, I look and I sometimes go, well, but can you try a little bit be more creative here? I mean, it's not. So this is just a question which is our question, Satyajit, for art, for philosophy today to decide to take on these ideas alongside with the connectivity of different geographic coordinates, to say that we should, all the novelties are great. Like, again, there is a pop song which was quoted in the book by Empire by Antonio Negri. I cannot remember. I think Nino Rossi who was singing, "Every weapon is right if you hold it right." So that is very important, that we have to know what's the right way of using technologies, basically.
But again, coming back to the point of how we've kind of forgotten the role and the position of mimesis and technology or machine, again, at the group level. That the idea of that individualistic approach towards, or individual approach towards understanding and accessing these tools, so to say, has become so overbearing that maybe that is where the role of art kind of operates, to kind of bring it back at the group level. In order to kind of further this discussion and this discourse on the larger cognitive potentials and possibilities of this.
Absolutely. I think we go back again to the question of consciousness. I'm not necessarily very big fond of, but in term itself is very important for the discussion, for the debate. When Sigmund Freud was talking about psychoanalytical possibility of psychoanalysis to explain the society throughout collective unconsciousness, because consciousness in general is a very collective idea.
Yes.
It is group.
Yes.
Like even the first people who, under Leroy Goran, paleontologists, who made investigations to show that there were groups of people surviving because of their using certain technique of how to deal with it, cold nature, etc., etc. So the group is very important idea. But now I want to say something. When I said even before, in one person, artist and scientist can reside. Already group idea, yes? When very kind of eccentric phrase by Deleuze and Guattari, you remember Capitalism and Schizophrenia, beginning of the book, it says, me and Deleuze, Gilles Deleuze and Guattari, we together write a book, but we write a book addressing questions coming from Hegel, questions coming from Kant, from Plato. So we're quite a crowded space. So this is a group, idea of group, which I mean, which means no time barriers. We should be able to take something from everywhere, elsewhere, that can be realized here and now. But there's also very important, philosophically, very important understanding of the return of the repressed, like in Freud's terms, and the capitulation of the missing dimensions of time in Deleuzian terms, which he actually very well explains in his book Cinema 1, Cinema 2, which is, for me, it was very exemplary work, and I still was expecting this to happen with the internet. And that is what important question which we're asking here. Will internet be able to create art in the same way as early cinematic means? Because cinema, until before Eisenstein, for example, it was just a useful registering chronological events. Yeah, for example.
Yeah, yeah.
Lumiere brothers in 1895, when they first projected their film, was just to show workers living in the factory. Harun Farouki made wonderful installation. You remember that, to show that actually they have shown, but in itself, this memory has become artwork much later. It wasn't art; it was production of something science has created. Now we can record our own. What we did yesterday, we can see on the screen. Ironically, when Lumiere brothers were the film was for the first time, 1895, projected on the bridge in Yorkshire, in Leeds. And next day, Yorkshire Post wrote a review saying that new art has appeared. Lumiere brothers were very offended to read this. They said, "We are not artists, we're engineers," because this time engineering was as today being a good famous artist. But then later, bringing into, in itself is also sounds very artistic actually, but then later, with the bringing of epistemological, I'm sorry to say these terms, and historical moments, cinema has received very important aesthetic status, which we can now. Internet today, what internet is great for. I mean, it's fantastic. There are some ideas also. I have some ideas, some tricky ideas also. Internet brought back something which forgot about completely. Everyday experience. Internet became part and parcel of our everyday experience. How it will challenge the art today, this is very interesting for me, for example.
Yes.
This in most of the postmodern writings, for example, there were some good stuff. For example, Habermas was talking about human knowledge and human interest. He was saying since Galileo Galilei, people are alienated from science, because the language they use is so complicated, the formulas they use are impossible to understand, etc. But internet today does things which Galileo took time, to calculate within a minute, within a second.
Yes.
But how much understanding or penetrating into this kind of some things brought for us by the technology is a big question, and even not, I think, agenda. That is what would be my, sort of entertaining this idea with you together, because I think the future is very positive in this sense, not really pessimistic.
Of course.
We have a lot to think in this positivistic manner. We must think of art becoming even richer with this machine.
Of course. No, so again, so the reason I kind of still prod on these points, of course, it's because of multiple reasons. One of them being, which you also mentioned in the note that you've sent, that the Turing machine kind of brings in the possibilities of plural realities.
Yes.
With and which is again where conversations of then AI kind of come into picture, where let's say we kind of give it certain amount of prompts, the response that it kind of gives back is in many which ways kind of based on singular realities, because it does not in many ways or manners allow for the possibility of coming across a particular piece of information. How do you ensure the possibility of chance and failure within this kind of a...
I understood you very well. Absolutely good word you used, reducing possibilities. And that is what I am talking about, non-essentialism.
Yes.
Of course, machine is notorious for its reducing, reductivity. It's programmed Programming is
Yes.
always reducing. But
Yes.
this is a poison which is also remedy, because
Yes.
what is reduced can also be irreduced. Can be
Yes.
found in it as irreducibility. So this is
Yeah.
an answer, and this is a whole fuss about. That's why I say Bernard Stiegler was absolutely right to bring back this Greek notion of pharmakon, not for the beauty of the word, but because we forgot about these things. You know, this kind of reductionism is very big
Yes.
question. We see it in
Yes.
politics specifically. I mean, it's very big political worlds all about reductionism. Even
Yeah.
academia. I mean, it's like I'm sorry to say, you're first teaching. I do it now and then also, but you know, just one example. If there is someone a new person appears, for example, in a philosophy, like let's say Slavoj Žižek, if you say
Yeah.
let's introduce into a program, and immediately a group of people would say, about who should we take out then? So you know, you don't have to take
Yes.
out anybody. You know,
Yes.
you see what I mean?
Precisely.
Yeah,
Precisely.
this is what what we have to think about in any case.
Yes.
I don't want to give any recipes. I have my own
Of course.
illusions, but it's a very important thing to think about it. We should not shut our own possibilities onto ourselves to say, oh, well, this is it. This is the door is closed. We cannot enter, but actually the door may be opened also. So this is
Yes.
really important question. What you're saying. It
Yes.
sounds simple, but that is a problem of our age, our times of what Stuart Hall saying, boxed in. You know, it's just
Yeah.
you cannot do anything with this. You know,
Yeah.
you just have to say, okay, well, that is we understood everything. We don't need you. That's it. Just very comfortable. But the comfort comes to the end. In any case.
Yes.
Once
Yes.
it comes to an end, they say, "Wow, my God, that was a problem because of Russia or because of Somalia or something like this," which is in some ways true in terms of war or everything. But yeah, we always Marcel Duchamp, you know, grave which I visited, has a very interesting phrase on it, as said by Marcel Duchamp. It's always the other who dies. It's always the other who is blamed to be, you know, like in this case, it's always technologies to blame. No, technologies have no fault.
Yes.
They don't think, you know, we think, cogito
Yeah.
ergo sum. So that is
Yes. Yes.
very important point. So that
Yes.
is, this is my positive attitude toward the world. Optimism, you know, optimism of the will, pessimism of the intellect. Pessimism aside, because yeah, pessimism because it's a Gramsci, yeah, Antonio Gramsci.
Yes.
I a little bit reinterpret, but this pessimism is the not wanting to do things. We have to have again, like my favorite philosopher Deleuze said, we have not to kill desire in ourselves. We have to keep our desire open,
Yes.
which makes curiosity. What Greek philosopher called taumazain. I think there is a Sanskrit word for it also. Curiosity, you know, love for the world. You told me once about
Jigyasa.
Yeah, Jigyasa. Yes. Very important.
Yeah.
This is what human has really. We have nothing else apart from that. Everything else comes after this. If you're curious, things are coming. Maybe not money. I don't know. It is a big problem, but money is not the most important thing.
Yes.
Most of the time, we only need it as a means of existence. We need much more. We need maybe Greeks for happiness.
Yeah. No, I think this is a great note to kind of, you know, start the next session, which is effectively on images. So look forward to that session and see you for the next session, Zika.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Pleasure.